Welcome, everyone, to the TIMI Talks podcast. I'm Nick Marston, here with my co-host David Berg, and on today's show, we'll be joined by clinical trialist Dr. Donna Ryan to discuss obesity treatment and the results from the SELECT trial. Well, Happy New Year, David. Excited to have the headset back on and to kick off 2024 in year 2 of the TIMI Talks podcast.
Yeah, that's right. So I guess we kicked off season 2 in the fall, but yeah, this officially marks the beginning of our 2024 series for TIMI Talks, and it's also a big year for TIMI in general. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary, and so over the course of this year, we plan to roll out some content that is directly related to celebrating what's a big milestone for our organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Very exciting year for us. And before we start, I do want to give a shout out to our podcast producer, Kate Brennan. She's the reason David and I are able to do this every month, and her work behind the scenes, editing out ambulance sounds and code blues overhead, has really made our job very easy and also very fun.
Most definitely. Yeah. Thank you, Kate. We love you. You certainly are the reason that this podcast has happened.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, there she is. And, she's always on, always listening. So, being that it's January and we have a whole new year ahead of us, I thought it'd be fun to discuss some of the storylines that we're looking forward to in the coming year. Anything in particular, David, that you're keeping an eye out for in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of potentially interesting storylines in 2024. And I guess one of the areas that I am particularly interested in, as you know, are the SGLT2 inhibitors, the sodium glucose cotransporter 2 inhibitors. And really that has been an incredible success story of cardiovascular clinical trials over the last decade or so. And the evidence base supporting the use of SGLT2 inhibitors in patients with cardio-kidney metabolic disease has really been quite impressive. But one of the areas that I'd say where we have somewhat less data are with acute manifestations of cardiovascular diseases, such as acute myocardial infarction and acute decompensated heart failure. And so there are a couple of trials that are on the horizon that are going to be addressing the safety and efficacy of these therapies, specifically in those types of acute settings. One of those is the MPACT-MI trial, and another is the DAPA-ACT-HF TIMI 68 trial, which we're leading here at TIMI. And I think this will really be sort of the final chapter of the SGLT2 inhibitor trial. So that's a storyline that I'm looking forward to potentially this year, maybe into 2025. I think another area that is exciting is the mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist. So I think as we've talked about before, one of my favorite drugs is spironolactone, an MRA. For a lot of different indications, but and we can get into that another time. But there's a new player on the block, sort of a semi-new player on the block, finerenone, which is a non-steroidal mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist. And that's a therapy that has been studied in mostly recently in the context of chronic kidney disease. But there are a couple trials coming up where it's going to be studied, or we're going to learn the results of how efficacious and safe it is in the context of patients with heart failure, namely heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. So that's a storyline I'm looking forward to, again, potentially this year. What about you? Any storylines that you've been following closely?
Yeah, well, first, that's great stuff. Always nice to see new therapies and new uses for heart failure drugs. So a lot to look forward to there. I think I have 2 or 3 that I'll mention briefly. The first is kind of the continuation of the factor 11 inhibition story. So we've covered this story in each of our last 2 episodes, including both the reduction in bleeding that was seen in Azalea trial when we had Christian Ruff on 2 episodes ago, but also the announcement of another trial, Oceanic AF, being stopped early for lack of efficacy. And so I really want to see the details of the Oceanic AF study and other trials that may come out this year. So I'm certainly excited to see that. The second is the space of new novel triglyceride-lowering therapies, specifically in their ability to lower the risk of pancreatitis in patients with sky-high triglyceride levels. This is something that our current therapies have not been effective at being able to treat. And we had a press release this fall that announced the BALANCE trial had showed a 100% reduction in pancreatitis in a rare genetic disorder that causes hypertriglyceridemia, FCS. And so I'm really excited to learn more about this trial, see the full paper and presentation, which I hope will come out sometime this year. And again, that's the BALANCE trial. So I look forward to seeing that. And then finally, I think a storyline that you and I both think will continue to dominate the headlines is the GLP-1 receptor agonists. We had a dedicated episode last year with Ben Sirica, which I'd encourage others to check out. But specifically, what we're learning about this in the context of obesity and how it has benefit in cardiovascular disease. This is really the reason for today's episode, where we'll be discussing the SELECT trial. I think most of our listeners are well aware of the SELECT trial, but just for those who aren't, or just a brief reminder, the SELECT trial tests semaglutide at a higher dose. Now, semaglutide goes by two names, Ozempic and Weygovy, depending on the dose. And the population in particular in this trial was patients with established heart disease or cardiovascular disease who were either overweight or obese, BMI that is greater than 27, but did not have diabetes. And that's really the distinguishing feature here compared to some of the prior trials. And the results were really striking. There was a 20% reduction in major adverse cardiovascular events. And so what's so significant about this trial is it's the first weight loss drug to show reduction in cardiovascular events, which in and of itself is great, but broader than that, it changes the paradigm of obesity, making it really a treatable axis of cardiovascular disease and really making it viewed as a true disease. Obesity has had stigma to it over the decades, but now with these data, obesity can be viewed as a disease that is treatable, and that's really exciting for the medical profession and really kind of our patients and society as a whole. So really excited about this conversation today.
So thank you, Nick. That's a nice segue into bringing on our guest, Dr. Donna Ryan. So Dr. Donna Ryan was actually a medical oncologist by background, but really has had a distinguished career as an investigator leading studies of metabolic interventions. And those have ranged from pharmacologic studies to nutritional and lifestyle interventions. And really, she has an incredible wealth of knowledge about the field of obesity. She's a professor emeritus at Pennington Biomedical Research Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which is where she served as the associate executive director for 34 years. And then relevant to today's discussion and your nice introduction of the SELECT trial, she was the co-chair of the steering committee for the SELECT trial, along with Michael Linkoff, who's at the Cleveland Clinic. And she was the senior author on the manuscript for the SELECT trial, which was published in the New England Journal of Medicine last fall. So without further delay, let's go ahead and bring on Dr. Donna Ryan. Welcome to the podcast, Donna. It's great to have you on the show.
Delighted to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Donna. It's wonderful to have you on and to kick off our first episode of 2024. I was just reading about the Oscar nominations for Best Picture, and I think we have to acknowledge that if we had awards for clinical trials, SELECT would certainly be the front runner for the Best Outcomes trial of 2023.
Certainly, it has been a career highlight for me.
Yeah, so we're really curious to hear, what the last few months have been like for you and your team after presenting and publishing such a major, impactful trial.
Yeah, so the last few months have been great. There's just huge interest in this, and it's as far as the team that executed the trial. Now we're writing all of the papers. So that's a bit of a slog, but it's fun.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we certainly know that slog, but it is the fun part, right? Is sort of really taking a deep dive into the data and try to answer all those questions that come up in these kinds of conversations.
Absolutely. What a great population too. 17,604 people from 41 countries. Really.
Yeah.
Quite a population.
Just an enormous accomplishment and huge congratulations. So we're obviously going to take a deep dive into SELECT in a moment, but first we'd love to hear about you. We'd love to hear about how you became involved in obesity medicine and in clinical trials of anti-obesity therapies.
Well, it's quite a story. I was a medical oncologist. I was interested in acute leukemia. And LSU asked me to help start this new nutrition research center called the Pennington Center. And the first director there was George Bray. I, for my love of LSU, agreed to do it. I was an associate professor at the time and not used to saying no either. So I went to Baton Rouge and helped George Bray start this new center. George is an endocrinologist. He's the father of obesity research. Wonderful person. He was very translational before it was fashionable. And he had a basic science lab where he was looking at the neurobiology of obesity. He was also a great clinician. And so it's really through that relationship with George, who mentored me sort of in my mid-career, that I got interested in obesity. And, George was very much into the biologic basis of obesity. So from the very beginning, he was a proponent of identifying medications that could help patients lose weight and keep it off. So that's my story.
Yeah, and you've obviously been involved in many obesity trials prior to Select, and the anti-obesity landscape, drug landscape hasn't always been so rosy. And so we're hoping you could provide some kind of historical context about the prior clinical trials and weight loss therapies prior to the GLP-1 era.
Oh my goodness. I think the big game changer was in 1994 with the discovery of leptin. When leptin was discovered, we all thought, oh, this is the solution. We've identified the obesity gene and now we've got a good target and we're just going to give people leptin and it's going to solve the problem. Well, not quite. Individuals with obesity have very high leptin levels. It's directly proportional to the total fat mass. The higher the fat mass, the higher the leptin level. And so, our studies with human recombinant leptin were a disaster. We gave even large doses. We didn't even get enough weight loss to qualify for an FDA indication. And the reason being is that, individuals with obesity, they got plenty of leptin. Their problem is leptin resistance, like they really are not sensitive to the effects of leptin in reducing food intake. So that was the beginning. That I think that it's important to start there, though, because it does demonstrate the biologic basis of obesity. So there have been a number of drugs that had been developed without much success for obesity, and then in the late 90s, we started to see newer medications. The first one out of the box was sibutramine. This was a medication that had been developed for depression. That didn't work. They noticed weight loss with it, and so it was then further developed as a weight loss agent. And then orlistat, which just blocks fat absorption. And then in the early 2000s, a whole series of medications that were really based on the observation, hey, this compound produces some weight loss. We didn't really have any sort of understanding of what we might target to produce weight loss, or what a good strategy would be to develop medications based upon a biologic understanding of appetite and body weight regulation. So we had the combination naltrexone and bupropion. Lorcaserin was developed as a very specific serotonin 2B receptor agonist, and Qsymia, a combination of phentermine and topiramate. And all of these drugs were really sort of based upon an understanding that the drugs had been developed for something else, but they were associated with some weight loss. So let's try to develop these for a weight loss indication. The first drug that was really sort of targeted at an appetite hormone would be liraglutide. So liraglutide was our first really based upon, I would say, a scientific understanding of what obesity really was. So these drugs were not exactly blockbuster material. They all had their problems, and they all produced only modest weight loss, about 5%. We also, I think that the real issue around obesity is how can we get the benefits of weight loss to health? It's not really about demonstrating weight loss per se. It's how do these drugs really improve health? And so the sympathomimetic drugs like phentermine and even phentermine topiramate combination, they increase blood pressure, they increase pulse, so there's always been this sort of downside to the anti-obesity medications. So demonstrating improvements in glycemia, in blood pressure, in um, lipids, all of those factors related to obesity, that was very important. And although the drugs produce modest weight loss, they did produce improvements in those traditional cardiovascular risk factors. So weight loss is good for you, but the problem is they didn't produce enough weight loss to really have an impact on disease modification. So the FDA required cardiovascular outcome trials for these medications, but they were not really successful. So in fact, the SCOUT trial of sibutramine showed an increased risk of cardiovascular events, and that was the end of sibutramine. So rimonabant was another medication that had been developed. Everyone was very excited about that, especially in the cardiovascular community. Rimonabant is a cannabinoid receptor antagonist. So you might expect that if you're antagonizing those cannabinoid receptors, it might not be particularly good for mood. Well, it wasn't, and it was associated with suicidal ideation and suicidality, and it was removed from the market. So we tried cardiovascular outcome trials with naltrexone and bupropion. That was a disaster because in the middle of the trial, they broke the blind, and that was the end of the light trial. So they tried to restart the naltrexone bupropion cardiovascular outcome trial, but then the drug got sold and the new owners did not pick up the paying for that cardiovascular outcome trial. Camellia TIMI was a trial of lorcaserin, and it did show non-inferiority, but lorcaserin was removed from the market because of an association with cancer. So the bottom line is we didn't really have any medications that are associated with weight loss that produced reduction in cardiovascular events. Liraglutide, was marketed as Saxenda, and the FDA did not require it to have a cardiovascular outcome trial because they had done one with when the molecule was used in diabetes. So liraglutide in diabetes had a positive cardiovascular outcome trial, but we did not do one in obesity. So I think, this has been, I think people really need to understand this has not been easy. We made it look easy, but it was not easy getting this study done or even funded or onto the sort of the dashboard of a big company. So Novo Nordisk deserves a lot of credit for sticking it out in the obesity medication game. And the audacity of doing a cardiovascular outcome trial with a medication for weight loss, that was really a very big deal. And so I have to give them a lot of respect for investing in this study because it was not a sure thing. I've been the lifestyle lady too. And so I had been part of Look Ahead and DPP. And as you know, Look Ahead did not show a reduction in cardiovascular events. Well, it was a lifestyle intervention, and really the amount of weight loss was pretty modest. We did achieve almost 9% the first year, but then there was weight regain. And overall, it was about 4% difference between the lifestyle and the control conditions. So not really enough to detect an impact on cardiovascular events. So thank you for giving this opportunity to see that weight loss is not only not bad for you, it's actually can be good for you, particularly with a medication that's associated with some other really good effects, good pleiotropic effects.
Well, I have to say, it's amazing to hear you kind of walk through each of those lived experiences. Obviously, Nick and I have had, have learned a lot about a lot of these trials, but I can hear in your voice the sort of the trials and tribulations and the true lived experience of these. And I think the theme that, weight loss can't be thought of in isolation, that has to be thought of in sort of more global, holistic terms about the impact on cardiometabolic health. I think that ends up being an important one, and obviously one we're going to spend a little bit of time on.
Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting about, you talked about liraglutide, and obviously we're going to be talking mostly about semaglutide today. Right. But before the focus shifted to obesity, we did have a growing evidence base for GLP-1 RAs in diabetes, and I think for many of us, Sustain 6 was sort of the first trial that put semaglutide on the map. Not certainly on the map to the extent it's on the map right now, but at least made us aware of this therapy. And so I wonder if you could take us back in time to when you were designing the SELECT trial and speak to what was already known about GLP-1 RAs at the time and how that then directly informed the design of the SELECT trial.
Yeah, so we knew that these GLP-1 receptor agonists had effects beyond glycemia and beyond reduction in food intake. So yeah, it had those two properties, and it did get an approval for a weight management indication and also for a diabetes management indication. But we knew that this compound itself had pleiotropic effects and effects that would be potentially really ideal for a cardiovascular outcome trial. So it has effects on inflammation, very important. It also has effects on postprandial lipids. It is associated with a reduction in blood pressure. It's associated with natriuresis and diuresis. So some really positive attributes of this GLP-1 molecule. I think the excitement around semaglutide was it's the first one that really produced double-digit weight loss. So it has robust effects on glycemia, of course, but the amount of weight loss with this drug was really made patients sit up and take notice. So in the step 1 trial, the average weight loss was about 17% from baseline. It's this amount of weight loss is enough to that patients find it cosmetically desirable. And I think there's so much buzz around that we forget that amount of weight loss also has an impact on clearing the liver of fat. It has an impact, that amount of weight loss does improve inflammation. It has robust effects on triglycerides, robust effects on glycemia. But the molecule itself is playing a role. So we're getting both the effects of weight loss per se and the effects of the molecule itself. So in designing the study, we didn't want anybody with diabetes. We wanted people who had a high risk for developing subsequent cardiovascular disease, and that's why we made this a secondary prevention trial. So everybody had a prior cardiovascular event who came in the study. They all had BMIs 27 or higher. We predicted a reduction of about 22%. That's how we powered the study. So finding these large numbers, 17,604 people, it required that it be a global trial, that we really have a lot of diversity in terms of geography, race. The studies sometimes it included both sexes, but it's sometimes criticized because it has more men than women. The problem is that women don't really catch up with men on that cardiovascular event rate until they're past menopause. So there are just fewer women in the pool. But we still have a robust number of women. 25% of 17,607 is a good number.
Yeah, it's such an important population, and one as cardiologists that we see all the time have atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, obesity, no diabetes. We will treat patients with diabetes with GLP-1s, or we were, still are, but this patient population was not being treated, at least by cardiologists, with these medications, even though they're, approved for weight loss. So this trial ultimately really was to move the needle in a really large proportion of patients, and so the results everyone listening knows were, really just as you expected, a 20% reduction in the primary endpoint of major adverse cardiovascular events, which is huge, and we'll talk about the implications of that in a minute. But I wanted to get back to the point you're making about the pleiotropic effects of this drug,
Yeah,
because I think a lot has been made, or
yeah,
asked about how much of this is acting through the weight loss versus independently of the weight loss, right? Because weight loss also causes some drop in blood pressure, some drop in triglycerides, some drop in inflammation. But then you mentioned some other mechanisms that would perhaps be independent of
yeah,
weight loss, and then of course the KM curve separating right away,
yeah.
separating early, whereas the weight loss, maybe it was preceding the weight loss. So what's your take on that?
Well, yeah, everybody wants to know that the answer. Is it the weight loss or is it the effect of the drug itself? Well, I don't think we'll ever be able to answer that definitively. But there were some people in the study who took the drug and did not lose weight. There is a huge variation in weight loss response with all of our treatments. And, when you look at the variation in weight loss response, it's enormous. Some people lost, so the average weight loss in the study was about 10.5% from baseline. Some people lost much more than that. Some people lost much less. Some people didn't lose any. So we'll be doing a mediation analysis, and that's above my pay grade. Epidemiologists are all over it. And so we'll be looking at that. I don't think we'll ever have enough data on the people who didn't lose weight and still took semaglutide to be able to say if there's a semaglutide effect.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I guess ultimately what cardiovascular outcomes trials are good at is telling you whether a therapy is effective in terms of reducing outcomes. It's always hard to kind of then speculate about mechanisms, but we love to do it. So at the risk of having another speculative question, one of the other discussion points, so obviously Nick touched on the early separation of the KM curves, as a prelude to talking about mechanisms. But one of the other observations was that for the cardiovascular death and all-cause mortality curves, there was this sort of odd reconvergence of the curves around 2 years, and then they separate again. Obviously weird patterns happen all the time, but I wondered if among the intelligentsia, if you guys had any thoughts about what that was all about.
Oh, believe me, Nick and David, there were plenty of intelligence people scratching their heads over this one. Yeah, it's so curious, it appears that there's an increase in the event rate in the semaglutide group and a decrease in the event rate in the placebo group in the middle of the 4 years of observation. They tend to kiss and then separate again. What in the heck is going on there? I think it's everyone seems to gravitate towards COVID, that this is some sort of effect of COVID. But that the time that's depicted in that relationship is not chronological time. It's time from the start of the patient in the study.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really put it against, the COVID pandemic. But there certainly would be competing causes of death during that COVID period, and I think all the brains seem to want to try to make something of that. So there will be an entire paper looking at COVID, and this will be something that we certainly will try to figure out. But it is a curiosity.
Yeah, it may just be unknowable, but it is interesting.
Yeah.
I did want to spend a little time talking about some of the key secondary endpoints. And as you'll certainly appreciate, and many of our listeners will appreciate, that in clinical trials, there's often a hierarchical testing procedure. So the nature of the hierarchical testing procedure in this case, precluded formal statistical hypothesis testing of some of the secondary endpoints. But I think you can clearly see from the hazard ratios and 95% confidence intervals that really the cardiovascular benefits of semaglutide in this population, are really not only include atherothrombotic risk reduction, but also heart failure risk reduction and reduction in all-cause mortality. Or at least that's the sort of the overwhelming message I think that emerges. I guess maybe my first question is a simple one, which is just, were you surprised by how good it looked for these secondary endpoints?
You need to understand my surprise in this way. So, there had been an interim analysis, and the interim analysis did not stop the trial. So, of course, everyone is saying, "Oh my God, it's not going to be good. Oh, it's not going to. It's going to, it's going to be. What if it's good? What if it's 10%? What are we going to say about that?" So. When we saw the first reveal, which was, of course, the MACE reveal, and they animated it, and there was a huge burst of applause among all the investigators and company employees who were invited to the reveal. And then, all of the other analyses that were shown to us, as you said, they are all in the right direction. Many of them, fit the confidence intervals, and it was just one good thing after another, except for this peculiar kissing of the curves. So it was just everything seemed to be in the right direction. It seemed to be positive. It was, as I said, it was a career high for me. It was beyond my wildest expectations, especially because I had so much trepidation about why did they do the interim analysis and not stop? Well, so it was all positive. I think the subgroup analyses, it's also very convincing. Everyone benefits, the old, the young, the women, the men, all races, all geographies. People with a A1C that's in the pre-diabetes range compared to those with normal glycemic, everybody seems to benefit, and that's all good. So I think what this says to me is that we've got a treatment here that seems to be more than just producing weight loss. It's producing disease modification effects. It has an effect on cardiovascular events. As you say, HFpEF is the next thing to be studied with this. Maybe atrial fibrillation. There are so many, like chronic kidney disease. There are. So is this medication a real weight loss medication, a diabetes medication, a cardiovascular medication, or all of the above?
Yeah, it's the best of both worlds when the interim analysis doesn't stop the trial, yet you still have very impressive, robust results, because it just gives you more data to work
Oh,
with and to
yeah,
look at
absolutely.
subgroups, and we really look forward to all the follow-up
I'm glad
papers
they
that I'm sure to
continue.
come.
I'm
Yeah,
glad they
yeah.
continue.
So I want to shift now to kind of to impact of these results, because as we've talked about, it really is such an important trial, and I think the impact has already been really, really big, not just for the medical profession, but really seems to be trickling down kind of to society as a whole. So I was, hoping to get your view on that.
So as for someone who's been touting the benefits of weight loss, it's really a dream come true for me, because I think that what people are now recognizing, this was so obvious to me at the AHA meeting, and when people stood up and made comments, that everyone recognizes that obesity and the effect of this excess, abnormal, dysfunctional body fat, it's driving all of these chronic diseases that fill our clinics. But it's not been something we've been able to address effectively. We haven't been able to affect it with lifestyle intervention. This is not something we can deliver in our clinics with success. we haven't been able to, I don't want to downplay bariatric surgery, but still the minority of people go for bariatric surgery. It is not,
Right.
it's not a popular treatment. So to have a treatment that produces such robust health benefits, for me, it's it's just an enormously satisfying end to my career.
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome. It really is. It really is awesome, and I think it really does is shifting the mindset about how people think about obesity as a systemic disease for sure, and something that we can do something about, which is great. Nick always loves the big picture question, so I guess I'll ask my big picture question, which is sort of a public health one. I guess it's the broader public health implications of the trial. And as physicians, we're often thinking about the patient in front of us, but there's also this opportunity to really think about how are we going to change the health of the population. And obviously better than we do that the denominator of patients with overweight and obesity is so large. And by, all projections suggest that's continuing to grow. So any thoughts about how we should be thinking about tackling the obesity as an epidemic, and should we be allocating these therapies? How should we allocate these therapies among the huge pool of eligible patients? Should we be giving them to everyone? How do we start thinking wearing a public health cap in all of this?
Yeah, I think that it's pretty clear that the risk benefit equation for secondary cardiovascular disease prevention in persons with obesity without diabetes, we got that. People with obesity who don't have diabetes but have had a cardiovascular event, they should be on this medication. That risk benefit is pretty clear. But how far to go with that is the question. I think it needs to be an evidence-based answer, Nick. So it's so we need more data to expand the indications for this. But it's pretty clear that going forward, we do need to implement weight management as the pathway out of this chronic disease epidemic that we have. The chronic disease rates in the United States are staggering. They're getting worse. And most of these chronic diseases are obesity related. So we are going to have to make the shift to making good weight management as the central pathway to good chronic disease management. Now, not everybody needs to have an expensive medication. We need, and the pipeline is growing and it's powerful. It's good. We're going to have oral medications that reach the same targets that we're doing with these peptides. We're going to have oral non-peptide medications. We're going to have other medications that are aligned more with preserving lean mass at the expense of fat mass. So I'm very upbeat about drug development in this area. And I think we're going to solve the problem of cost. What we will need to do is we really need to educate our healthcare providers on how to deliver these medications safely and effectively in the population who needs them most.
Yeah, those are great points. I mean, not a clinic has gone by this past year without GLP-1s coming up, and just as often as me bringing it up, it'll be a patient bringing it up.
Yep.
And I think that's a
Yep.
big difference here compared to hypertension or hyperlipidemia, where patients have a very active interest in getting on these therapies. Maybe for slightly different reasons than we do as cardiologists, but ultimately getting them on therapies is going to benefit them quite a bit. And so, you started to mention kind of looking forward. This is going to continue to be one of the most exciting stories in medicine throughout 2024. And so just as we wrap up with one last question, I wonder, what you're most excited about in this space for the coming year. And is there anything that our listeners should be watching for, any trials or any new exciting news that you anticipate?
Yeah, well, the next trial that we'll read out in this area will be with tirzepatide. Tirzepatide produces a bit more weight loss than semaglutide. it's also a GIP GLP-1 dual agonist. And so it has a morbidity and mortality trial, surmount morbidity and mortality. And it'll come out in, I think, about 3 years. And we'll be interested in that one because it has a component. It's not all secondary prevention. It has a component of primary prevention in their inclusion criteria. So that's going to be a big one. This year, I think what everybody needs to be looking for is how are the payers managing this? I'm predicting that we're going to see that this sort of therapy is going to drive some changes in how we and into the crisis that currently exists about pricing for medications in the United States. So I think that'll be sort of a really interesting thing to watch. I think there are going to be a lot of sort of cross currents and some innovative thinking on how to pay for this. That's going to be very interesting in the immediate future. But longer term, look out for Surmount MMO.
Yep.
Yeah.
Donna, it's been such a pleasure to hear from you on this important topic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. I truly enjoyed it.
Well, that was a really awesome discussion that we had, and Donna's such a great guest. Incredible to hear her perspective on the SELECT trial, but not just the SELECT trial, but really a career, decades of being in obesity medicine, trying to find therapies that could lower weight and benefit patients' health overall. So a really great discussion. I want to give a shout out to Ben Sirica for introducing us. Ben was part of the executive committee of the SELECT trial, and so put us in touch. And so, thanks to Ben for that.
Yeah. So thanks, Ben, if you're listening in. Hopefully you're listening in. And as a quick shout out to Ben, another quick shout out to Ben. He was our guest on season 1, episode 5, which was also a discussion of GLP-1 RAs, mostly in the context of diabetes. But I think that episode really nicely dovetails a lot of the content that was discussed today. So one of the things that's great about this episode is I think it's a question that is broadly relevant, and obviously GLP-1 RAs have gotten a lot of popular attention because of the weight loss effects. And since it's January, it is actually a resolution season, and so I thought that was a nice opportunity for us to think about resolutions for the TIMI Talks podcast.
I like it. Sounds good.
So Nick, any resolutions for 2024?
I have to go first. All right.
You do have to go first.
All right. Well, about a year ago when we were discussing starting the podcast, I ordered a book on Amazon called Podcasting for Dummies. And that book has been sitting on my shelf collecting dust for the last year. So I think my resolution is going to be to read that book, or at least, major sections of it, and see if I can get some new ideas for the podcast.
All right, that's good. A little extra reading. That's podcast oriented reading. Okay, so my resolution is way more maybe materialistic is the word. I don't know, but I'm gonna say that I resolve for us to have more TIMI Talks swag in 2024.
Yes.
Right? Can't you imagine stickers, keychains?
Well, you have to share what happened, right? How this kind of came to be of interest.
Yeah,
right?
No, that's right. So I'm totally
friend of the pod, right? Friend of a pod is a tattoo artist.
That's right. So Abby Kanj, who is one of the project directors here at TIMI, has a friend who's a tattoo artist, and he put together a really cool sticker that has our logo, and then superimposed on it are these sort of cartoonish characters of both Nick and me. And I showed my wife, who immediately asked me why somebody superimposed Beavis and Butthead on the logo of TIMI Talks, but I thought it looked awesome. And so that got me thinking, maybe we should have more swag.
Yeah.
So definitely, for anybody who's been listening and been a fan, look out for swag in 2024. We're definitely going to try to
at the very least, we can mail you a bumper sticker. Well, that sounds great. Well, awesome, Dave. I think this is a great way to kick off our first episode of the year, and looking forward to continuing this with you.
Indeed. So for the TIMI Talks podcast, this is David Berg and Nick Marston signing off.
Thanks for listening. The TIMI Talks podcast is hosted by Dr. David Berg and Dr. Nick Marston and produced by Kate Brennan. Like and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, and follow us on LinkedIn and X @TIMI Study Group to be informed about podcast news and upcoming episodes.